I'd describe this as secondary woodland. The place was originally the part of the Great North Wood that extended almost as far as Croydon, and it was eventually cleared for farmland, and now it's been recolonised by trees. You've got the trees that the Victorians planted when they were landscaping this place. You've got the native trees that have blown in through seeds, and then you've got an understory of the lower shrubby growth. You look around and you've got this tumble down Gothic woodland. You don't know whether it's a woodland that is full of monuments or whether it's a cemetery that's full of trees. The reason it looks like this is down to neglect. The cemetery company was originally very profitable, and they kept the place absolutely manicured as an open area with occasional plantings of exotic trees and whatever they wanted. So you could see from one side of the cemetery to the other, and it was all beautifully landscaped. And then what happened was people started spending less on burials and labour prices started to go up, and the company had less money to spend on maintenance. So by 1969, there was one bloke pushing a lawnmower around 52 acres of cemetery, whereas in the late 19th century, there'd been over 200 full-time staff. So the result of this is that trees were coming up, they weren't getting cut down, and the whole place was just jam-packed with natural invasion of greenery.
Nunhead is one of the so-called Magnificent Seven cemeteries built by the Victorians because they needed somewhere to bury the dead of London. The cemetery was bought for a nominal fee in 1972, I believe, by Southwark Council. The Friends of Nunhead Cemetery was set up about 9 or 10 years later to help Southwark Council to bring the cemetery back into better use, to help out in the day-to-day maintenance of the cemetery and to make it more accessible to people and a more welcoming place to come. I've been involved in volunteering with Friends of Nunhead Cemetery for about 7 years now. And my current role is the Monument Inscriptions Recording Coordinator. We're now up to about 14 volunteers, which is the most we've ever had as far as I know. Bearing in mind that the cemetery has around 44,000 monuments and there are about 250,000 people buried here. It's a huge job. Our challenge is to try to record every single inscription on every single monument in the cemetery. There is no other record other than what we're doing of the inscriptions. Many of the inscriptions are fading fast. Some of them have gone forever. So we want to try and capture as many of those before they're lost. What we have to do is, first of all, to clear the grave so that what's on it is legible. We then record as accurately as we can what is on the inscription and take a photo of it, and eventually all that information will go online. But the reason I'm doing this is because it's here. I think it's important work. We get lots of people coming along and contacting us, wanting to know where their loved one's grave is. The only way they're going to find that out is if we can locate it for them. And hopefully if we've managed to capture the inscription.
Reading the inscriptions, it's not like reading a poem or reading the newspaper or something like that, because every inscription represents a person Most of them represent families. You can see a lot of children who died young, a number of people killed in wars, and a great deal of human sorrow reflected in the inscriptions that you read. I'm working with Mike, who's my husband, and it's quite fortunate because he does the heavy work. So far as we do heavy work, we don't actually do an enormous amount of heavy work because in parts of the cemetery there are fallen trees and all sorts of things that other people, the heavy work squad, tend to look after. Every time you come on a new grave, it's kind of voyage of discovery because you never know who you're going to find. The cemetery was opened in 1840. The people here span an awful lot of years and a lot of different occupations. When you do a bit of research on the people, you see that there's a lot of people from, if I might say, the Victorian middle class, bankers, merchants and so on, a very wide range of people, and people who seem to have worked for the government in one way or another. There are a number of graves of people who worked for the East India Company. Today we found two particularly interesting monuments. One is a young man who was killed in the last year of the First World War in France. The other one is the son of a knight. The stories behind the stones I find absolutely fascinating. You know, you can always think, oh, well, I'm going to find something really interesting today, and in fact you almost always do.
The balance between the trees and the graves is very interesting, and if we just mindlessly went ahead with the idea, for example, that the monuments were of supreme importance and every tree that was threatening a monument had to be cut down and removed, you would end up with a sterile sort of wasteland. On the other hand, if you decided that every tree was far more important than any monument, and you just let the monuments be destroyed by the trees, you'd lose this priceless record. It's a social history that, you know, covers, as I say, nearly 270,000 people going back to 1836. What's happened with all the trees coming up is, in their way, they have saved Nunhead Cemetery, because a lot of other cemeteries have had to be dug up and the remains reburied deeper to alleviate the crisis in burying space in London. But because Nunhead Cemetery is a wildlife conservation area, it's a woodland, it's safe from that. Not only would it not be legal to do it, but it would be completely impractical, because the only way to dig up these graves would be to rip out every tree in Nunhead Cemetery, and that's not going to happen.